Okay, so today we have David, and I feel bad. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce your last name.
I know it's Cao,
Say that again.
Tsao, Cao.
Okay, Tao
Yeah.
from Clovis Community, who is going to be talking to us about AI in chemistry. I'm really excited about this, so I will hand it over to you, David.
Hi everyone, good morning. So happy to be here with all of you to present this talk using AI in chemistry for breakthroughs in medicine, as well as a little bit about how I use it in the classroom. I know there have been a lot of other great talks organized by Lori, so thank you for putting this all together, where there's a little bit more of an educational spin to this. Mine's about half and half, some chemistry and some educational. To start, I have to confess that this talk is going to be about how AI is specifically used in biological chemistry, but I am not trained as a biological chemist. I was trained as a material chemist, so I see another chemist here on the talk, so you're more than welcome to correct me if I misspeak on anything. I was trained as a material scientist, but AI has really been used in a really large way within this particular subfield of chemistry, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So first of all, this talk will go into, first of all, what are proteins and why specifically the structures matter for us. Then we'll talk about AlphaFold, which is the AI program that deals with these proteins and some of the breakthroughs it has generated. Then we'll go into other uses of AI. Some of you may be familiar with AI, especially ChatGPT. We'll talk about myriad of ways AI actually has been used nowadays besides just ChatGPT and just AlphaFold. And then a couple of ideas for using AI in the classrooms, teaching, writing, practice, and maybe even some research as well. So first of all, proteins. Like, what are proteins? You may have heard of them before and you think, oh, if I want to go to a gym and bulk up, I need to consume a lot of protein to gain muscle mass and stuff like that. But proteins are more than just for eating. For chemists and biologists, proteins serve a lot of many crucial biochemical functions within our living organisms. This is a crystallographic structure on the right-hand side here of a protein called immunoglobulin G, IgG, and this is an antibody. It's one of many different types of antibodies in our body. And what antibodies do is they're a protein, but their specific role is to bind to foreign particles in our bodies, such as bacteria, viruses, etc., marking them for destruction, and then another cell will come in and take care of that. But they're really important, and they will then protect our body from harm. Notice that this antibody has its own particular structure. It looks like a little bit of a T here. The binding sites that it uses are on the two arms here, on the left and on the right-hand side. Here's another crystal structure. This is a crystal structure of what's called an enzyme. This is a phenylalanine hydroxylase. It's a catalyst. It's used to catalyze the reaction of phenylalanine into tyrosine, which is an amino acid. But what enzymes are generally is they are proteins or other, could be small molecules that really help carry out thousands of chemical reactions that occur in our bodies that are necessary for our survival. How they do this is by speeding up reactions, and I won't get into the chemistry details of this, but if these reactions were running too slowly, our bodies would actually not be able to survive. We wouldn't be able to live and to be able to carry out all the different functions that we need for our survival. But the presence of these particular proteins called enzymes will then speed up these reactions to the point where we can actually survive and thrive in our world. Here's another one. So some proteins are also messenger proteins, and they're responsible for signal transmission, for coordination of a lot of different biological processes between cells, tissues, organs throughout our body. In fact, so this particular crystal structure here on the right-hand side is the crystal structure of a growth hormone here in blue, bound to some sort of receptor here in teal. And hormones, if you are unfamiliar with these are things like our testosterone, estrogen, other different types of hormones that communicate with other cells in our body to influence a lot of different aspects of our biological function. And they play a very key role in our development in many different ways. Here's a protein that we actually consume. So this is This is a particular protein called actin, and this provides structure and physical support for cells, some of which also allow the body to move. So think our muscle cells, our muscles here. And this particular protein has a very long, lengthy structure, and this is called actin filament. It's composed of different actin subunits within this particular structure here. And this is, like I said before, responsible for the contraction apparatus in our muscle cells. And then we also have some proteins that help bind and carry small molecules such as iron within cells and throughout the body. This is the crystal structure of ferritin. It's a protein that binds iron and carries it throughout the body until it needs to be used. So say, for example, maybe you're going for a workout, you're going for a run, and all of a sudden you need more oxygen uptake. Oxygen is going to bind to iron, bind to hemoglobin, but the iron needs to be released to be available to do those reactions and to be carried to the correct locations. And so some proteins within our body, such as these, can regulate and help carry the iron molecules that we need throughout the body and release when necessary. So if you're looking at the protein structures as we're flipping through them, you probably have noticed that there's a lot of different types of structures of proteins. And this all kind of comes down to something that biological chemists and protein chemists say all the time, which is the structure dictates the function. And that's really key here. All these different proteins have vastly different structures, and the structures will then dictate what that particular protein does for us. So far, in order to determine a protein structure, scientists typically have grown crystals. And then these crystals are then used in a technique called X-ray crystallography to then determine that particular structure here. So on the right-hand side, this is a really beautiful polarized filter image of lysozyme crystals. What they'll do is then they'll take these individual crystals and put them onto this X-ray crystallography kind of instrument, send X-rays to that crystal and scatter the beams to be able to figure out the exact structure that we were showing you earlier. The issue with this, though, is that crystallization of proteins in particular is very difficult because proteins are massively large molecules. And ever since 1850, scientists have been in this kind of endeavor to try to crystallize proteins. So far, yielded about 173,000, 200,000 proteins, which sounds like a lot, but billions, if not more, exists. And so then we run into a problem because if we don't know what the crystal structure of a protein is, then we don't really know and understand its function, and that kind of hinders research. The reason why crystallization for proteins is so difficult is because there's a lot of different factors that go into crystallization. Things like how acidic, maybe you've heard of pH before, but how acidic is our solution? The temperature of our solution, how precisely is that controlled? That also affects crystallization. The particular crystal structure that you're trying to make, this concentration, a myriad of other factors really all play a role, so making this quite a tricky endeavor. There's a new experimental method I'm not going to talk about it, get into briefly. It's called a cryo-electron microscopy. It holds some promise in helping scientists generate 3D structures of proteins more quickly, but that is more nascent and still kind of picking up steam. But anyway, so with regards to crystallization itself, right, if we want to try to figure out its structure, so far it's been difficult, but this is really where AlphaFold comes in. AlphaFold is this AI program that's been developed by a subsidiary of Alphabet, so part of Google, called DeepMind. And this first came out into the field back in 2018 here. In 2018, the first iteration of AlphaFold, called AlphaFold 1, placed first in overall rankings in this competition for computer-based structure prediction called CASP, Critical Assessment of Structure Prediction. So what happens is in this competition, scientists are given an amino acid sequence. And what amino acids are is they are these small molecules that will connect together, and really, really long string of them. And then once you have this really long string of these different building blocks, you can think of them as little Lego pieces connected together. They then interact with each other in different ways through different forces to then give us our 3D structure of proteins. So these computer scientists and other scientists are given this kind of underlying amino acid sequence and told, hey, can your computer program accurately predict the structure of the protein that we're going to provide for you? The protein structure is not known in advance. It was something that was just discovered experimentally, and they kind of hold the answer, right? Don't really reveal the answer until the competition, and then they try and figure it out with these computer programs. So here's an example of it here in the middle. So this was from 2020 when they refined AlphaFold and released AlphaFold 2 here. Again, in the same competition, AlphaFold 2 places first again. And this time it scores above 90 over 100 in what they call a computer accuracy versus real structure test. So in the photo above, what's going on here is that in blue, this was the prediction for the 3D structure by the computer program, by AlphaFold. And in green, that was the experimental structure figured out by X-ray crystallography. And if we see this, it basically matches. It matches almost 1-to-1. It's a very, very good match for very difficult protein structure. There's a couple other pieces down here. So the root mean square deviation at the bottom of 0.8 angstroms. This is also considered very, very good. And the reason for that is because chemical bonds themselves usually range in about 1 angstrom, 1 and 1.5 angstrom in length. So if you're able to get an error less than 1 angstrom, less than 1 bond length, you're doing very, very good. And then their score, this is something that they calculate here, is 0.93 out of 1. So really this computer program, again, from taking this, all these building blocks and sequence, was able to figure out the structure to almost near perfect precision, which is very impressive. And then in 2024, so this is very recently here, again, they refined the AlphaFold model to release AlphaFold 3. And then they also released an openly accessible server, which is really cool because now all of us, and I myself have gone in there, you can play with AlphaFold and put in your own sequence of amino acids. And now they've also allowed people to play with proteins in terms of how they interact with DNA and RNA and other small particles. But we can go in there and play with it ourselves and see what structures can be predicted with this. So how was AlphaFold trained? AlphaFold was trained using structures from what's called the protein data bank. This is a really cool collaborative effort among these crystallographers. But basically what happens is that whenever a protein structure is solved using X-ray crystallography or cryo-EM, the scientists then collaboratively deposit this data about the structure to the protein data bank, which is funded by the federal government. AlphaFold was then trained on these solved protein structures in the protein data bank. So there's information about the structure, the sequences, and then AlphaFold was given a training data set. And this is really important. And this is one of the reasons why, at least within the chemistry field, AlphaFold has really had a lot of good successes. But within other subfields of chemistry, while AI is starting to pick up, there hasn't been as many large breakthroughs as there have been in biological chemistry. Because biological chemistry, they have a really, really nice data set to train the AI model off of. It's kind of like the old adage of, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data going into your model or your calculator, you're going to have bad data going out. Similar idea here, right? You need a really good set of data, which the proteins have. And that does not exist for a lot of other chemistry things, just quite yet. So what are some breakthroughs that AlphaFold has been able to enable in our health field? Well, one of them is targeting antibiotic resistance. You may have heard before that antibiotic resistance is something that is becoming a larger and larger problem where some bacteria are basically able to withstand antibiotics that they're exposed to so that they don't end up getting killed off. That could be a problem specifically for things like maybe C. diff. But the reason that this is a problem is because there's increased use and also misuse of antibiotics, and that's leading to some bacteria developing this resistance to our antibiotics. So some scientists are now trying to figure out how to block specifically the resistance mechanism as opposed to just killing off the bacteria. because they think that if they're able to prevent the bacteria from developing resistance to our antibiotics, then we can continue using our antibiotics. But a lot of this is going to have to deal with protein structure. So if we understand what protein structures are able to prevent the antibiotic resistance from taking hold, then we're able to then help and take care of that. Another one is designing effective drugs. A lot of small molecule drugs that we have out on the market interact with receptor sites on proteins within our bodies. Understanding the particular, very, very particular shape of the receptor site on the protein will then lead to better understanding of the molecules that need to be synthesized. But a lot of the proteins that we know that should exist in our body, we don't understand the crystal structures of them yet. We don't have that 3D structure, so we don't really know, hey, how should we design our molecule to fit into that slot if we don't know what the slot looks like? And so if we're able to use AlphaFold to understand what that receptor site looks like, we're then able to design our small molecule drugs to fit into the receptor sites and then interact with them. There's also some work by other research groups on trying to prevent cognitive disorders. There are proteins in our brain that kind of act up as like the cleanup crew in our bodies. Some of these proteins, if they fail, they can then lead to cognitive disorders. So understanding the structure will then lead to understanding how they work. And maybe if they start failing, if we're able to then develop or maybe build out these protein structures, maybe we can help prevent some cognitive disorders here. And lastly, not healthcare related, but this is a cool thing because I'm really big into trying to reduce our use of plastic in the world, but enzymes, this is a type of protein that I had talked about earlier that catalyze and speed up reactions. Some of these enzymes can be used to break down plastics back into their initial state, into their raw building block state, so that they can be reused instead of landfilled. Again, if we're able to understand the particular protein structures, the enzyme structures that lead to them being able to break down these plastics, then hey, we can discover new enzymes, build out new enzymes that will then help speed up this process and hopefully get rid of a lot of plastic waste that's everywhere. That's also the sciencey side, but there's a lot of different other ways that AI is used, some of which you may have heard of. Right? So first of all, writing. This is probably the most ubiquitous one. ChatGPT, people use it to write books, sometimes complete with drawings. On Instagram Reels, sometimes I'm scrolling through that and I'll see it. People are like, hey, I've written a children's book with AI. Or I've used it to write emails sometimes. If someone's asking for a justification for something, I'm going to throw it through ChatGPT first and read through it. I'm like, hey, that's pretty good. Tweak a few things and send it out, save you time. But also, I've heard of doctors using this to try to push back against insurance companies who are denying people coverage. Instead of spending half an hour thinking about, oh, well, how do I want to craft the letter to the insurance company to try and reverse this claim? They just have ChatGPT write it and it saves them a lot of time. We know healthcare professionals are very busy and don't want to have to deal with that. I've also heard of people using it for getting help when English is not your first language. So maybe someone will say, hey, what is the word for this? Or write out what they want to explain. And ChatGPT will be like, oh, how about this word? Right? And it's a way to help some of our non-native English speakers learn English. I've also used it to help me write a little bit of code. I'm just like, hey, I want to play in Python a little bit. ChatGPT, I want to do this. Can you write me something in Python? And it'll spit out something. I'll try to be like, doesn't quite work. Here's the problems. Can you tweak it? And I'll tweak it, right? Anyways, lots of writing things we can do there. Trip planning. People have used it for that as well. Never been somewhere before. You can have AI draft an itinerary for you, a day-by-day schedule. People have used AI for that as well. I've also seen that people have developed AI for identifying plant diseases. There are applications out there where you can use your phone, take a picture, and then after going through a database, I'll say, hey, it's probably maybe this particular plant disease. This is, I think, particularly useful for people who enjoy gardening and maybe don't have access to people who are very well versed in this, or if you're a farmer and trying to make a living doing this, you can quickly identify maybe what diseases that your plants have and then find the solutions for them. Photo editing. I've played with this myself. Adobe has implemented AI into its photo editing suite. So maybe you take a photo and it's all just purely land and you want to put some water in there, you can do that. Sometimes it's not very good. Like I've tried it, I'm like, the water doesn't look great, but it's getting better and better every day. And that's something that people can do. Yes, boundaries should be put in. That could lead to some misuse and maybe of pictures that aren't really real if we use this in the wrong way, but it's possible. Maybe if you're just doing it just because you want to create something beautiful for your house, you can do that. Summarizing, kind of on the writing side, but you can have AI summarize things for you, like maybe all those terms and conditions that we usually all just click a checkbox for, hit accept and move on with our life without really reading. Imagine a world where we can have AI actually summarize the terms and conditions for us and point out, hey, these are the important things that you need to pay attention to in our terms and conditions and be aware of. To play Pong, to create new games. I've also heard of people who said, hey, I want to play Pong again. Can you create a program for me to do that? It's happened. Or to even create new games. Someone else I read went and said, hey, can you make a new game for me that's kind of like Sudoku? Right? It's never been made before. Another person, this is really incredible when I read about this, was they actually asked different AI programs to kind of work together to create a 3D game, playable with controls, graphics, everything. Even if you don't know how to code, you can do that as well. NASA research engineers have used AI as well to go through a lot of design iterations for mission hardware. It usually requires a lot of manual trial and error. But now AI can produce up to 30 or 40 iterations in an hour, some of which humans have never come up with before. And that some of these are better from an engineering standpoint. Some of the designs that AI has come up with have been less mass, stronger, stiffer, lighter. But sometimes the design is also weird, right? This engineer wrote that AI one time plugged a hole that they needed to actually attach a part into that hole. And they're like, well, clearly that's wrong. Clearly that's wrong. Sometimes use it to plant the garden. A gardener used ChatGPT to provide inspiration for what to plant in their yard that would be compatible with the climate, with other species already present in their yard. Something cool can do. Videos, people have used this for already not so savory purposes. You may have heard of some uses of this that were not so great, but there are people trying to push back and figure out what kind of protections we can make for these. Right? Deepfakes. Actors and actresses have their voices and likenesses used to create videos of them doing and saying things they've never said or done. This is happening. But this can also be used, I think, in fun and lighthearted ways too. Or even in teaching. Maybe I want to create an animation of something scientific that I want to explain. And I look around and the animation isn't there. I can maybe ask AI to generate a video for me. Because in chemistry, we're often dealing with very, very small things that we can't see. So how to explain that? Try the animations, try drawings. Maybe we can use videos for this too. Sometimes use this for organizing. Someone had a really messy computer desktop and said, hey, I want to have all my files organized in a really neat way. Can you help me figure out a way to organize all this? Here's all my files. Here are all my file names. How should I arrange them? ChatGPT goes and says, hey, what about this? Yeah, not bad. I see a lot of comments in the chat here, so I'm briefly gonna take a look. Yeah, so someone said use ChatGPT to shorten text if they want to send to students sometimes. I should probably do that too. Sometimes I write announcements that are too long, and I've had students tell me, oh, professor, can't you send out a shorter announcement? So I'm like, I think it's a lot of good information, but hey, maybe I'll read it if it's shorter. AI to help you with writing, ChatGPT for program review. Oh, that is clever. I'm going through program review right now for chemistry. Should probably do that. Personal development plan. Fed the raw data from the IR data dashboards and nailed the analysis. That is really cool. That is very awesome. Yeah. Laura, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious, what are the main IA tools that you're using for this? Is it ChatGPT or are there other ones, including your slides too? Like I'm seeing a lot of people, this doesn't look like PowerPoint. It looks like something more interesting.
Yeah, so this actually is PowerPoint, but I am happy to openly confess I did try running this through a AI program first and say, hey, try developing a presentation for me on how AI is using chemistry. I literally typed that prompt into a program, a different AI program that generates presentations, and it spat out something that I was just like, this is not very good. So then I made my own presentation here from scratch, and this isn't in PowerPoint.
Wow, okay.
But there are websites that do aggregate and show you a whole list of different AI software suites out there. And one of them I can type into the chat here that I found is Shingu.fun. So this has a lot of different AI programs for modeling, analysis, presentations, writing abstracts, writing business pitches, presentations, a whole suite of them. But yeah, if you plug into Google search something like, hey, AI tool aggregator or something like that, there are other websites out there that I know of that also will give you a huge list of different AI tools out there. Because you're right, there are a lot of them, like including AlphaFold, right, that chemists will use.
Are you mostly using ChatGPT and like in your work, or are you using?
In my everyday, mainly ChatGPT, I have played with AlphaFold a little bit and thought about maybe are there research avenues that we can pursue with students using AlphaFold. But mainly for every day, if I want to get something done quickly, if I want to summarize something, if I want to send out an email that I'm not too sure how to craft, I'll have ChatGPT give me a first draft and then I'll double check that.
With the research part of it, I hope you don't mind I'm asking all these
Oh,
questions.
no, please.
How far are they with the cognitive parts of the research using that tool? Like, are they making more advances in that?
Yeah, about using AlphaFold to help combat cognitive diseases. I'm not quite sure. If you're interested, I can get in touch with you later after I take a look at the research papers myself.
Mhm.
But I'm not entirely sure where that is
Okay.
currently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that part is really interesting, the research part of it and how they're using that tool. So anyway, I didn't quite understand everything. But I get the gist of it and it's very, very interesting. So I'll be
Mm-hmm.
right. Maybe other people have questions or comments.
Yeah, so computer modeling is not brand new. I know this AlphaFold only came out like 5 years ago, but 30 years ago, I was using a program called Spartan to model computers. What I like about this is the sharing of the database. So Spartan will share with AlphaFold and everyone can benefit from that.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know Spartan will share information with AlphaFold. That's
Well, no, I'm just saying Spartan had its own database and you had to buy Spartan to do the molecular modeling. But now it looks like all these computer modeling programs are getting together and they can share the information and will make better models.
yes, that is true. I myself use Spartan as well. And yeah, you had to buy into that or have an institutional license for Spartan. But yeah, so it's really nice to have these shared models where your AI and your computer programs can keep iterating on the data that's coming in and get better and better and stronger and stronger. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments right now? All right. So for all these reasons, right? So for what I showed you earlier, how AI can be used to advance scientific research, but also how much it's being used just in our everyday world right now, I think it's really crucial and really key that we teach our students about AI. It's kind of like with every new technology that comes out, it's going to be here to stay. Right? Calculators replaced abacuses, and abacuses went away. We have our calculators. Then computers came along. Computers, new technology, right? They're here to stay. We got then the internet. We got Google. We got Wikipedia. So I think that it's really important that we meet this challenge for sure, definite challenge, by teaching and preparing our students to interact in a way that's ethical and that's appropriate and that will help them in the future with AI. one of the things I think is important is that we need to scaffold, right, this critical thinking in AI, right? Because let's take a look at this particular prompt and response from ChatGPT here. How many R's are in the word strawberry? ChatGPT responds, 2 R's. And I reply back, are you sure about this? And ChatGPT says, yes, I am confident. I'm sure about this. Clearly, it's wrong. And this I threw into ChatGPT like a week ago. But the reason why this happens is because ChatGPT parses your input 1 word at a time, not 1 letter, but 1 word at a time. And then ChatGPT will convert this into some sort of numerical digit that are then processed by the program on the back end to pick the most likely word that's going to be in that sequence next. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not strictly probabilities, but from a high level, that's what's going on the back end. And that's because fundamentally, if we think about a computer, they're all just switches, on and off switches, ones and zeros, that are turned on and off by the computer code that we write. So because ChatGPT is parsing our input and the program is written in such a way as to parse it by word, it cannot separate and examine the pieces of words, the letters themselves, and then ChatGPT cannot figure out that the word strawberry has 2 R's. Another, can ChatGPT actually really think for itself? A recent video I saw on Instagram described how someone was asking ChatGPT to actually write 10 iterations for like a business proposal content, something like that. And what they did is they said, hey, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to give me the reason why they wrote what they wrote with every iteration. And it turns out by doing that, ChatGPT will write better and better iterations every time. Meaning it doesn't really think for itself the first time it comes around. And then this morning, I was reading a newsletter that I get pushed into my inbox. This morning, OpenAI announced that they are trying to fix this very problem right here. A lot of their engineers have named this problem the strawberry problem because they cannot get the letters correct in strawberry. And they said they are releasing a new model that is able to actually think critically and fix these issues. We'll see about that, see what happens. I also think that critical thinking is important because let's take a look at this output from AlphaFold. So this is from AlphaFold server. So I was playing around with this and let me describe what's going on here. Can you see my mouse cursor on the screen? Yes, okay. So here in dark blue, these are areas of the protein structure where AlphaFold server is saying, hey, with very, very high confidence, we think that we got this part of the structure correct. Lighter blue, less confident, still maybe 80% confident, give or take. Yellow, now we're 70, 60%, and then orange, 60 to 50% confidence. I show you this because for chemists, when I take a look at this part of the structure right here, this ring, I go like, that just seems very odd. It just feels wrong from a chemist standpoint. But that's where our training comes in. That is where, because we have been trained as chemists, we take a look at this and go, yeah, this computer model probably didn't do a correct job there. That's probably wrong. And I think that that's important. We still need that critical thinking element. We still need to teach students the material so that they're able to fundamentally look at the computer output and be like, I agree with you, or no, I disagree with you. Yeah, to ChatGPT's strawberry problem, I see David's posting in the chat here that new O1 model for ChatGPT was released yesterday. Yes, so that is hopefully going to fix their strawberry problem. How I instill critical thinking to my students, I have students actually work with AI themselves to test its capabilities. So this was one of the discussion prompts I put into Canvas for the students. I asked them, hey, go ahead and ask ChatGPT a question about a topic that you learned so far this semester. It can be theoretical or calculation-based in nature. Then copy what your question to ChatGPT was and the response you got from ChatGPT and evaluate its response. Was it correct, incorrect? How could it be improved? So this was what happened. All my students asked conceptual questions such as, what is a buffer used for? What makes a system spontaneous? Explain Le Chatelier's principle, all chemistry things, all conceptual questions. And the students' evaluations of ChatGPT, excellent, correct, better than some YouTube videos. Thankfully, no one said, better than the professor, but probably because they were in my class, they didn't dare write that into a discussion post. But it's quite good, right? But then I said, all right, I noticed a lot of you are just asking conceptual questions. I generated a similar prompt, but asked them to give ChatGPT a calculation-based problem instead. And when that happened, ChatGPT started getting problems wrong, and the students noticed. I had taught the students beforehand the calculations, the chemistry, and then they said, all right, the professor taught us about this problem. Let's run through ChatGPT. ChatGPT got it wrong. Granted, it's been getting better, and ChatGPT has developed a partnership with Wolfram Alpha, which is a computational program to help fix some of these errors. But still, even some really fundamental things like balancing a chemical equation, making sure the number of atoms on both sides of your reaction are the same, still wrong sometimes. Checked a month ago, right? So still need some more. But how students can use it to help them? Extra practice. Consider this. Can you quiz me on questions similar to the following? What mass of magnesium is required to react with 5 grams of hydrochloric acid to produce magnesium chloride and hydrogen? Students can put this into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will be like, all right, here's a list of questions that are similar to this. Go ahead and give them a try. And actually, I saw a student doing this in class, actually, and I was like, oh, what are you up to? And he's like, oh, I'm using ChatGPT to give me some more questions for practice for our upcoming exam. I'm like, oh, great. How are the responses? He's like, eh. And I'm like, yeah, because I asked ChatGPT, well, thanks for these questions here. Can you solve them for me? And it got the first one wrong. It simply did not balance the question. David, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been playing around with ChatGPT Wolfram Alpha in my physics classes, and I can concur that it's getting some things wrong. It's getting a lot of things right. My students and I have been sort of playing around with it and trying to push its sanity a little bit. I was yesterday trying to develop a GPT of my own by prompt engineering and sort of giving it some behind-the-scenes system prompts. And I can tell you that the prompt engineering matters. Like if you just copy and paste the problem in, it can get it right 80% of the time, maybe. But if you prompt it first with things like you are an expert in physics teaching and like you explain to me the step, like it starts to get better and better and better. So there's a lot of stuff that seems to be happening behind the scenes, as it were. And I wonder, I don't so much have a question as a statement, maybe like, yes, we have to get our students critically thinking about this stuff. Do we undermine AI when it's like wrong and now we're setting up this adversarial, professor versus the AI? Or do we come in and say, okay, well, how do we prompt engineer correctly? Like we're not speaking with a person, we're not speaking with an intelligence. We've got to kind of help this thing contextualize what's going on here. And so I wonder if a part of it isn't just critical thinking, which is important, but also how do you use AI best practices? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great point. I recently, like a couple months ago, started reading up on prompt engineering. It's not something that I've thought of giving to my students myself, but if we are to collaboratively work with AI in the future, which I think is going to be the case, I think that you bring up a really great point, and that this is something that we should consider teaching our students, because like I mentioned earlier, if we were to give any sort of AI program better input, it's going to give us better output. And maybe through prompt engineering, that's one of the ways that we can help prompt these AI programs to ingest its own better input before spitting something out. Yeah, great point. I haven't thought about it very deeply, but I do appreciate that comment. Yeah. Yeah, other things that I've used ChatGPT for myself were actually to go ahead and help me write exam questions. So sometimes I don't want to rely on a publisher test bank because I know that some of the questions sometimes get leaked. So then I know if I want to test my students on some topic, I can have ChatGPT write me a question. And if I don't like one of the answers, I can be like, hey, revise this particular answer. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Maybe I should definitely take what David suggested, which is do a little bit of prompt engineering, maybe it'll give me better questions. But this is something that maybe can help us save a little bit of time if you're trying to think about some question that you want to ask your student. And by the way, if you do this, ChatGPT's outputs and a lot of AI's outputs are not copyrightable because copyright law requires human authorship. So ChatGPT's output, as well as other AI's outputs, probably falls into one of two domains, which is still being worked on in the legal field. Either public domain, anyone can use it, or derivative work based on copyrighted work. In fact, OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, they themselves acknowledge that they do not own the content output of ChatGPT. The user does themselves. David mentioned in the chat here that he's done this himself. He's ChatGPT to provide variations on the theme on exam questions, which is really awesome. Basic principles for different actors, situations, etc. You can create a lot of different exam versions this way as well, which would be really helpful. All right, last thing I wanted to show you is these are some articles that I was reading that I think are worth your time if you're pretty new to this AI. If you're pretty well versed in this, then I think the second article is going to be more interesting. So the first one is from the New York Times about a lot of ways that real people are using AI right now. It's where I got some of the examples from. And then the Stephen Wolfram article that is more technical, but it really goes on to the nitty gritty behind what is the ChatGPT program specifically doing on the back end, and why does it work and how does it work? So with that, thank you for coming to the talk and listening to the presentation. If you have any more questions or want to talk more, I'm more than happy to discuss with you. There's a lot of great things that are going to happen in the future in this field, I think. So feel free to contact me. Here's my contact info. Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes and it looks like a lot of people are using ChatGPT in different ways. And I was thinking maybe we could have a couple minute discussion of how we are using it. I know I've used it, and I teach English to help me come up with discussion questions sometimes, or questions that I want my students to answer. I'm doing an online class right now. I've actually used it to help me come up with essay prompts. Like I have the idea of the essay prompt and I've put it in, and then it's come up with maybe a different phrasing, but I always find that I still have to go through it. Sometimes it gives too much information and I have to take it out, or the way they break it up, I don't want it. So I kind of use that as maybe a starting point when maybe that creative side of myself isn't coming through, I'm just sort of stuck or something. So in that way, I've used it to help with creativity. And people always say, like, you're really creative, Lori, you know what you're doing. And I'm creative in some ways, but in other ways, I'm not creative. So anyway, I just thought maybe other people, how else are other people using it, especially program review? Yeah, just go ahead and unmute and speak.
Do you want me to
Maybe I
explain
should
how I'm
stop
using
the
it in program
recording now.
review?
I don't know.
You're right. Yeah, do I out myself? Susie's
David,
looking.
this is being recorded, but I can edit this
You
out.
want me to? I could stop the recording right now.
No, I can edit it out.
Keep it on. Keep it on. Keep it on. So yeah, I've been using ChatGPT in a lot of ways, and I think I'll talk about 3 of them if I may. One of them's personal. I have a learning disability that targets writing and the ability to write and all that kind of stuff. I find that I can express myself verbally much better than I can in writing. ChatGPT has been wonderful, right? Just to help me write faster. Writing is such a burden for me, and so to be able to just have something come up with a framework and then I can, switch it around. So that leads into program review, right? Sitting there at some of these prompts about I know the analysis, I've done the analysis and I know what I want to say, but it's hard to get it down. With ChatGPT, I can just give it some highlights and then it sort of structures the writing for me, and I can analyze that and move forward. With the data analysis, I was trying to get it to fail. I was fed it the entire IR table in a PDF format, and I tried to get it to mess up, and it didn't. I had already done my own analysis. I ignore institutional research is like their graphs and stuff because I can't stand their axes, and I'm a data scientist. Like I dig into it, and so I did my own. ChatGPT nailed it. Like it caught the trends, it understood the context. It even warned me when it said that I had like it said that, you know, my non-binary students seem to be my most successful students because they're 100% success rate because there is such a small number of them represented. Like I didn't expect it. I expected it to get sort of tripped up by that, right? So maybe I underestimated its ability, but it was were there any insights it saw that I didn't know? That didn't happen, right? So maybe I'm as good as the AI or vice versa. But like it did it in about 4 seconds.
So
Whereas it took me 45 minutes to get through it.
I have a question for you, David. So you're someone who obviously went through school with a learning disability. I don't know quite how you phrase it, but with learning differences. And you
it's related to dyslexia, but yes.
Okay, but you made it through school without AI and stuff. And I'm not quite sure how to use this. Like you learn tools to help you. And now there's ChatGPT or other AI that can help you even more. How, like, do you feel like students, and this is always my question too, which I think is like we need to teach students to kind of stand on their own, but then also use AI. So I'm kind of, and I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot, but with like, what do you think about that? Because I know I have students in my writing classes who maybe their ideas are great, but their grammar is just bad, or they do have a learning disability and they have a hard time getting, like, they can talk to me. And in fact, I even had one student who his essay was really bad, but in the class discussions, he was brilliant. And I was like, you know this, you just are, I don't know what's going on. So
one of my English teachers once told me that I'm a bleeder, that when I write, I bleed every word onto the page. It just takes such effort and emotional mental work to get it down. And I think for me, it's the actual connection of the hand to the body to the mind. There's a motor problem. Going in really, really fast. Coming back out, if it's connected to my lips, it tends to come fast every other way, and it doesn't work. So to your point, I, as a student, always took the responsibility on myself for my learning. It was never my professor's fault, right? It was never the book's fault. It was my fault, to a fault. But then also, I expect the same of my students, and I teach this explicitly. Right? You are in the driver's seat. This is a student-centered class. You are responsible. I'll assign homework, but you are responsible for knowing how to do it. I'll find out on the exam. I studied in graduate school. I did a physics master's and I did another master's thesis on how people learn physics in big classroom environments, because there was this brand new thing called the internet at the time, and we were trying to study the difference between what was going on. And the core sort of foundation that we set out to figure out was, how does one's perception of their responsibility for learning affect how they learn physics in particular? We were really interested in that. So I've always sort of preached the gospel of, you have to be responsible for your own learning. And as I've started, it's really this semester I've really started discussing this with my students, because last May, ChatGPT was a literal dumpster fire of physics. Like the confabulations and the hallucinations that ChatGPT had were incredible. Like it was just so wrong in so many ways. It was making up numbers and calculations. It was just really bad. And I told my students that the first week. I was like, don't use ChatGPT. It's going to lead you astray. The second week, I decided to try the new 4.0 model, and it blew me away. Like it just blew me away as to how accurate it could be with the right prompt engineering and things like that. It's still messing up stuff, but it's much better than it was. And so we've been having this discussion with my students and things. And I've just been really trying to emphasize the responsibility that my students have for learning the material. What I mean by that is I expect you at some point to be able to show me or tell me or explain to me your thought process. You know, what conceptual framework are you trying to solve this problem within? And you will not be asked about right answers. But I've been doing this for 23 years of my career. You will not be asked about right answers. You will be asked about how you got there. And so I don't know if that's an answer to the question that you asked, but there's so many different ways. I think, you know, we have these sort of visceral reactions when it comes to these new technologies and how things are changing. And we kind of always go back to this idea that somewhere we were sitting in a cave around a fire and somebody started drawing on the cave walls and got called out, right? You're going to write it down and we're going to forget it. You know, the printing press came out and we're all doomed now because everybody's going to have the ability to read. And while I understand AI is fundamentally different than a lot of these other ways, I just kind of have to wonder if we're overreacting slightly.
Well, and then you never know, like, what student who can use AI for writing, who maybe is dyslexic or something, like maybe that gives them confidence to then pursue more education and end up, you know, getting a PhD in something and becoming like the savior of the world. I mean, that's like pretty extreme, but you know what I mean. So
you know,
right, because oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
No, you go ahead.
So I think both of your points, students have used ChatGPT to help them write things, and it's gotten to the point where even academic journals, like I recently looked up ACS, the American Chemical Society's regulations for AI, they don't explicitly ban the use of AI, and I'm just purely guessing here, but I think one of my guesses for this is because a lot of the chemistry research is increasingly coming out of China, but for them, English is not their native language. And so they're producing a lot of really, really good science and coming out with good data and models and things like that. But for them to be able to express it using the scientifically accepted language of English is sometimes difficult for them. So the ACS says, hey, if you're going to use AI, you have to tell us how you're using it, and you cannot use AI for authorship. But you could imagine a situation where they say, hey, you know, this is the data I produced, and this is my like first go at writing the paper, but can you reword it in a way such that it uses proper English grammar and it is then intelligible to other readers throughout the scientific community.
yeah, that might be something with writing that eventually happens, like how you used AI on your paper, how did you use it? But this is like the total geeky side of me, you know, like I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and in there they ask their computer like calculate X, Y, and Z, but they also still have the knowledge to do it themselves when they need to do it themselves. And so they're brilliant and they have the learning and they rely on the computers, which do it faster, but they, you know, when they have to do it themselves, they can still do it. And so, you know, so that's my geeky thought.
No, one of my biggest fears is that the divide between a student that's there just for the ride, that only cares about getting the green box on their online homework or whatever, and the student who takes responsibility for their learning, that just gets bigger. Like these technologies tend to exacerbate things like the digital divide or whatever. I'm really concerned about our lower income students not being able to afford the $20 per month that ChatGPT lets the better model work, right? And so the student that's able to afford that gets the information faster, better, more precise, right? And we end up with this sort of classification and stratification of learning based solely on who has access to which model the AIs have, right? And so like why are we not providing accounts for everybody in the district to, you know, level the playing field? So that worries me, I think, a lot more than the actual effect of the learning on my students. I think it'll accelerate the learning of my students. Like my students, like David, students sort of reported that there was this, they like it, right? They're like, oh, this is way better than all the YouTube videos I had to go look through, right? Because in physics, you look up a YouTube video and it's either a professor like me that's just spouting stuff out of context and they have no idea what's going on, or it's like for high school and it's kind of cutesy or something like, and there's not something that's really targeting their the level that they need to be met at, which typically is, I don't know what I'm doing. How do I start? Right? How do I get over this? And so ChatGPT can do that. Based off yesterday's meeting, I started writing my own GPT, right? Doing that prompt engineering. And I was able to get it to a point where it's like a helpful tutor, right? Like it, when a student comes to them and says, I need help solving this problem, it starts prompting them and says, you know, okay, well, have you considered trying this? And do you want another hint? Do you want the whole solution? Do you want me to walk you through, right? Like, and as a sort of an interactive tutor type situation, right? I'm all for it. I've been trying to get online homework systems. We pick ours based on the fact of how much tutorial help does it give us, right? Because I'm not going to be there 1 o'clock in the morning when they're frustrated about their homework assignment, you know, and the tutors aren't available and they're just banging their head against the screen. So if we can take the friction out of the learning process and enable learners to assume the responsibility for the learning, yay.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I feel like there are so many free versions. I'm not quite as concerned about that because there is, like, you know, even ChatGPT has gotten better. But even sometimes like Grammarly, you know, I'm now wishing that some of my students would even use the basic unpaid Grammarly just to catch some of those mistakes. And Grammarly, well, it's gotten much better, but even before ChatGPT, I would plug in a student's paper that had tons of grammar errors and it couldn't fix it. It just couldn't fix it. I think now it's probably better with the paid version, so I get what you're saying, but sometimes even that unpaid would help them. So anyway, a huge conversation.
For later times.
Yeah, and you one more thought, if you have one more thought, David, or David, our presenter. But I appreciate you all for being here. And David, I so appreciate your presentation today. I learned a little bit about chemistry, which I find fascinating. Chemistry was not my subject in high school. Kind of regret it a little bit now. We will be putting all of this stuff on Fresno City College YouTube, or if you are at Reedley, we have an intranet, and at some point that information will go out. And Susie asked David, do you have slides that you can share with us? You are muted.
Yes, I will put it up on the cloud somewhere, then I'll send you the link.
Okay, yes, and if you haven't taken, that is the YouTube channel she just stuck up there, which is fabulous and has great resources. And then I did a little survey. If you haven't taken it, or if you have more thoughts, add in, you can do it again, add in more thoughts. I'm always looking for ideas for professional development. And even though it's coming from Reedley, I'm hoping that I'll be able to share it with all the other campuses in the district, because I feel like we are a community and we should be sharing these things and presentation. So anyway, thank you, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Lori.
Bye.